So over Shabbos at the oil, we had those of us who had the privilege to be there, we began to learn a wonderful Maamer from Tafshin Chav Gimel, 1963. And the Maamer was edited by the Rabbi and published as part of by Maamer Yivchar. Actually, the Maamer is the beginning of a Hemshech, at least for my Maamer. Maybe there's more after. I guess you don't get to easily see that when you look at it from this new Sfarim. But in the old Malukit, which was ordered in the way they are published, you can probably see there might even be more than for my Maamer, but certainly for my Maamer that are in this Hemshech, in this continuation. They're all Muga, yeah. Certainly the first part with Shabbos Shuvah, Sukkot, and then Simchas Torah. Maybe there's another one after, I don't know. As I mentioned in the note, this Maamer discusses two themes that dominate the discussion of Chassidus on Rosh HaShana. One is the idea of Binyan HaMalchus, that is to say that the Yid elicits from Hashem a desire to reinvest in creation, to reinvest in the project called creation. And the other is the essential choice Hashem makes of the Yid, giving the Yid the existential state of being a Jew, irrespective of what he does or does not do. And this is awakened by the Shofar, even though, as I just finished saying, this is an existential state of being attached to Hashem, which therefore should mean that an act does not play any role in this truth. It just is. But yet the Shofar expresses it. Now, the truth is that there's a third element here that the Rebbe discusses, which is part of the classic understanding of Rosh HaShana, but the Rebbe, of course, reframes it in the light of Chassidus, and that is the idea of judgment. And this is how it kind of interplays. The pasuk that the Maamer opens with is Yivchar Lanu es nachlasenu es koin Yaakov asher arav Salah. Hashem should choose for us in our inheritance the pride of Yaakov, who he loved forever. This pasuk is in Tehillim, chapter 47, Perek Mem Zayin, and we say it 7 times before we blow the shofar. The simple level, the reason why we read this pasuk is because the pasuk right after this pasuk, we read the entire chapter 47, and the pasuk right after this pasuk reads, Allah Elokim B'Sruah, Hashem B'Kol Shofar, which means Elokim, God, arises in Truah, in blasts, and Havaya in the sound of the shofar. So on the simple level, the pasuk seems to be kind of a poetic, reiterating the same point. Hashem arises in the shofar. One first, Elokim in Truah, and Hashem b'shofar. But of course, everything's b'diuk. And as the Medrash tells us, Elokim, we all know, is the shame of Gevura, the name of Hashem, which implies constraint and judgment. So Elokim, Allah Elokim b'Sruah, Hashem goes up in judgment, and then Havaya b'Kol Shofar. It switches to him Havaya, which implies Rachamim. So through the shofar, Hashem goes from judgment to compassion. And this, as the Medrash, is what the Jew accomplishes through shofar, causing Hashem to go from judgment to compassion. But if, as we just said, we're reading the pasuk, not just Allah Elokim b'Sruah, but we're reading the entire chapter, and in that chapter, just before this pasuk, we read, Yivchar Lanu es nachlasenu, that Hashem should choose for us in our inheritance. And this choice, as the Friedrich Rebbe explains, is talking about the choice of Hashem in the Jew, which is what gives the Jew that space within him that's unaffected by any external factors, even factors of my own action, because it's the existential state of being a Yid. And that's what the pasuk says. Then that means in the shofar, we don't just elicit the classic compassion that's aroused by the fact that a Jew does what he's supposed to. When a Jew does what he's supposed to, it effectuates by Hashem that he responds measure for measure in a compassionate way. So every mitzvah, in theory, accomplishes a similar idea. If God forbid there's some sort of judgment, and a person does mitzvahs, teshuvah or whatnot, then he causes Hashem to go to rachamim. But if we're invoking the pasuk here, Yivchar Lanu es nachal aseinu, and we're talking about Hashem's choice in us that gives us this existential state of being connected to Hashem, irrespective of our behavior, then that means the shofar elicits a compassion from Hashem that's connected to this existential state of being a Yid. Which means, as where we're going with this is, that the shofar elicits that which is really untouchable. We're talking about a level of a Yid that makes him existentially Jewish, irrespective of behavior, which means no matter what you do, you can't alter that. And yet the shofar elicits a compassion that comes from that very level. Because it reaches the essence of Hashem, which ordinarily, or in reality, is untouchable. It's unreachable, right? The divine system is designed in such a way that it's commensurate to our behavior. So it's designed that we do touch it, right? There's compassion and there's judgment, and there's a system of rules that tell us when compassion is in order, and there's a system of rules which tell us when judgment is in order. And when we change our behavior in accordance with the rules, so does the divine system change. But the essence of Hashem, which chooses the Jew beyond the system, just because seemingly is not touched by anything in the system. And yet with the shofar, the Jew touches it. Even though the Rabbi doesn't say this at this point in the Maamer, I'm going to stay this point, which will help us understand as the Maamer goes forward. Because this means as follows. There's really two elements of the shofar. There's one element of the shofar that it's a mitzvah like every other. And if it's a mitzvah, it has its cause and its effect within the system of the divine. Then there's an element of the shofar which touches the essence of Hashem. And that essentially comes from the fact that it's not a question of the shofar or not the shofar. But the question is, who's blowing the shofar? Who is blowing the shofar? An analogy that we can use, and as we'll see further in the Maamer, the Rebbe kind of uses a similar analogy for a related inyan, is this idea that when a child does something funny, a child laughs or whatever, so people find it cute. But when somebody else's child does it, I don't necessarily find it as cute as when my child does it, even if it's the exact same thing. Why? If it's just objectively speaking, this is a cute laugh, then why would I find it more cute for my own child? Because it's not a question of what the child did. It's a question of whose child did it. So it's not a question of just the shofar. The shofar causes Hashem to go from judgment to compassion. It's not really what's happening. Deeper still is who blows the shofar. It's Hashem's Yid is blowing the shofar. It's the one that I chose who's blowing the shofar. So that element touches the essence of Hashem, because it's the essence of Hashem that's related to the shofar, to the Yid. It's not the shofar per se as much as who is blowing the shofar. It's Hashem's Yid that's blowing the shofar. Now at this point, the Rebbe introduces the other element related to Rosh HaShana as described in Chassidus, namely this idea of Binyan HaMalchus. Malchus, of course, as we all know, is divine projection, revelation. Malchus, sovereignty, does not have any character trait on its own. When I tell you someone is king, it does not tell you if the king is smart, silly, kind, mean. It just tells you that this person has the capacity to project his desire upon others. It doesn't tell you what that projection will be, because Malchus inherently just is projection, the capacity to project outward, to speak, to relate to an other. So, and therefore, all of creation in essence is Malchus, comes from Malchus. Whatever system Hashem created, designed for himself, known as the Chassidus, that all remains divine system. It hasn't created anything yet. It's only set up a system of divine experience, if you will, or divine self-experience. Creation only happens when there's Malchus, when there's projection, when Hashem decides I'm going to take all this entire system I've made for myself and project it outwards. So Binyan HaMalchus, to build sovereignty, to build Malchus, then means that every year, or when Hashem projects to create, it's a 1-year lease. Hashem invests of his system within creation and says, I'm doing it on a year lease. And at the end of the year lease, Hashem reconsiders, was the whole project worth it? And if the answer to it is yes, then Hashem reinvests. And of course, what makes the project worth it is if the Yid is fulfilling his command, is fulfilling what Hashem wants, is fulfilling the kavanah. Hashem says, I created the whole world because I want to have a relationship with an other. So are there others who are relating to me? And when the Yid blows the shofar, that's the Yid saying, yeah, it's worth it. So Hashem reinvests in creation. Now, of course, the world keeps on going even during Rosh HaShana, even before the shofar, which means when Hashem retracts his investment in creation, it's not that he retracts the entire investment, but rather he retracts his desire within creation. And from the moment that Rosh HaShana begins, from the eve of Rosh HaShana, the footnotes, he talks about a little pilpul, if it's exactly at Shkia or is a little bit before Shkia. But at the beginning of Rosh HaShana, at the onset of Rosh HaShana, Hashem, so to speak, retracts his interest in creation and does it mechanically. So the mechanics of divine projection are still operating, but they lack all enthusiasm, joy, interest. Hashem is doing it in a state of faint. That's the lashon of the previous Rebbe. His pilus, his alphas, faint. And when the Yid blows a shofar, Hashem reinvests all of his excitement, all of his passion, all of his desire into creation. So this is what's classically said about Binyan HaMalchus. Now, it's also stated that Binyan HaMalchus where is it? Binyan HaMalchus is not just on the level of divine projection into creation, that is Malchus in and of itself, but the lashon of Chassidus is Kol hadvarim chayzim l'kadmusa. Everything goes back to its beginning state. So, meaning like this, it's not just a question of like this. One way of understanding Binyan HaMalchus is to say that Hashem created a divine system, the Shofar, and the divine system says that creation is worth it if a Yid does mitzvahs. So Hashem is asking, is the project of creation fulfilling its purposes? So that would mean the purpose exists because the divine system has been made. But the question is the purpose being fulfilled? And then that would change whether Hashem projects from his system into creation. But when we say Kol hadvarim chayzim l'kadmusa, and all things return back to their original state, then that means even the divine system Hashem made for himself also goes back to its original state. Which means the question is not simply, we have a divine system, but is it worth it? Is the Yid doing what he's supposed to? The question is, why should you have a divine system at all? Why should there be a system? Not, is the project working? But why should there even be a project to begin with? Or in other words, not just the Shofar exist. Question is, should the Shofar project into creation? No. Why should the Shofar exist? Why should the divine system exist? Not just the system exists, and is the Yid fulfilling the purpose for which the system exists? That's one question. That's an external Binyan HaMalchus. That's only Malchus as it relates to creation outside. But Binyan HaMalchus, as we understand in Chassidus, is not just Malchus Pshutai, but it's Malchus of everything. Malchus of Chachma, Malchus of Bina, so it's Kol hadvarim chayzim l'kadmusa. All things revert back to their original state, which means the question Hashem is asking is not, is the project being fulfilled? But why should there be a project, B'chlal? So if that's the case, in order to re-elicit from Hashem that he reinvest in creation, we can't just tell Hashem, look, the reason why it's worth for investing in creation is because we're fulfilling your mission. That's not going to do it. Because Hashem says, why should I have a mission, B'chlal? So how do we effectuate from Hashem that you should reinvest in creation? Because we have to touch the essence of Hashem. You want to know why you should recreate in the system? Because the Yid is here, and the Yid is existentially attached to you. Getting back to the same point, that it's not a question of the shofar, but a question of who is blowing the shofar. If we're talking about the system is operating, and the question is the mission of the system being fulfilled? Okay, then shofar is the answer. Look, there's a shofar, so the mission is being fulfilled. But if the question is not should the mission be fulfilled, but the question is, why should there be a mission, B'chlal? So blowing the shofar itself is not going to help you. It's who blows the shofar. The Yid is blowing the shofar. The Yid is attached to you, the essence of Hashem, and that's why it's worth having a whole system. That's why it's worth having a mission, because there's a part of you here. So it's the who blows the shofar. It's the Yivchar Lanu. It's the choice that a Yid has in Hashem, that Hashem has in the Yid, that's what's elicited by the shofar, and that's what creates Binyan HaMalchus. So Binyan HaMalchus takes on a whole new meaning. Not just that, look, Hashem, we're fulfilling your will, and therefore the whole project is worth it because, look, the mission is being fulfilled, but much deeper than that. There's a Yid here who wants to connect to you, and therefore it's worth having a mission. Touches the very essence of Hashem, which chooses the essence of the Yid. Now, this is I'm foreshadowing here because the way the Rabbi structures the Maamer is in such a way that it's a question and an answer. The question is how does a Yid through a mitzvah elicit that which is beyond mitzvah? If Hashem is not king anymore, then how do we have a mitzvah that talks to Hashem as he's beyond king? I kind of alluded to the answer or foreshadowed the answer that the Yid is existentially attached to Hashem and thus is capable of eliciting from Hashem even the desire for a system. But this is that this idea that a Yid is connected to the existential fact that a Yid is is attached to the essence of Hashem's choice. That's going to be explored in great detail and nuance in the Maamer. And the Rebbe says as follows, introduces another idea to further sharpen this notion. To further sharpen this idea that through the shofar, the Yid elicits from Hashem the very essence of Hashem. So the explanation we just gave now as to why it's required that we touch the essence of Hashem for Binyan HaMalchus is the explanation we gave now is because everything reverts back to its source. And because everything reverts back to its source, the only thing that's left is the essence of Hashem. And because the only thing that's left is the essence of Hashem, that's what you need to touch in order to elicit that Hashem reinvest in creation. Or Hashem reinvest in a system which then projects in creation. That's one explanation for why we have to touch the essence of Hashem. But in Chassidus, oftentimes, it gives a different explanation for why you have to touch the essence of Hashem. And the other explanation is based on the principle that anything which falls so low must come from a higher source. And actually, Rabbi doesn't say this in the Maamer here, but in Chassidus, it gives two examples of this idea. This is the principle of, what's the Lashon? Something which goes Lamata Yoser is sources Shodesh Lamala Yoser. Something which descends so low must come from a very high place. So there's two explanations. There's two mishalim given in Chassidus. One mashal is the mashal of a wall that falls. Right. So when a wall falls down, so the brick that's highest on the wall will fall farthest away from the base of the wall. Right. So that which is higher will fall farther away. That's one mashal often given in Chassidus. But the mashal that Rabbi gives here is a different one, which is a different mashal that's often given in Chassidus, which is this idea of a teacher being able to communicate to students. So the deeper the understanding the teacher has of the concept, the more capable he is of relating it to an other who may have not heard of the concept before. If a person has a vague grasp on the concept, even if they may understand it, but if their grasp of the idea is vague, then they cannot convey it to somebody else. Right? Like the rabbi likes to say, how do you know if you understand the Maamer? If you can explain it to an intelligent McGill student. So you have an intelligent student, which is completely unfamiliar with the language and concepts you're learning. But if you have a good handle on it, then you should be able to communicate it to someone like that. And the Rebbe says there are actually two elements to this mashal. One element is that the teacher is capable of distilling a very deep concept in simple words. This, he says, is the symptom of the idea. The idea remains abstract as an idea, but it gets distilled in simple language. So the words the teacher uses are actually used to describe the very idea. Just that the teacher has such a good handle on the concept that he can distill it in simple words, or in very easily accessible words to the intelligent student, or even to the less intelligent student if he really has a good handle on the idea. But this is all tzimtzum. Tzimtzum meaning the quality of what's being said is the same. What the word the teacher says and the idea as the teacher understands it in his own mind is the same. It's just a question of distilling it to a simple language. That's one chush. That's one capacity a teacher has, is having a very deep understanding. He can distill it. But then there's another element, another part, which is if the teacher has a good enough handle on the idea to the point that the teacher can use a mashal. If the teacher can use a parable. So now here, when the teacher says the parable, the words the teacher is using is not the same as the idea, but just distilled. It's actually an other. It's a whole other concept he's talking about. But the teacher has such a good handle on the idea that he can even relate it in words and concepts that aren't the actual idea, in a total other, in a mashal, in a parable, like right here, right now. The Rebbe gives us a mashal. The Rebbe is giving us a mashal for this idea that something which is on a lofty level can fall to a lower level. You have to remember, we're talking about elikus here. We're talking about godliness. And we are so far removed from godliness that even when we hear a mashal and we try to extrapolate from the mashal the actual idea, we're left with another mashal. Because what do we think about now? Yeah. So we just heard from the Rebbe that the lower something is, it means it comes from a higher source. Close your eyes and imagine it. What do you envision? What do you envision right now? When you think about this idea that the lower something falls, it must come from a higher source in elikus. What do you imagine? We're not imagining elikus. We're imagining some other human image we have. Because the concept is so far removed from us. So the very fact that Chassidus is capable of giving us a mashal is because the Rabbi has taka understood it. The Rabbi taka understood elikus, and therefore they're capable of telling us, you know that foreign thing that you guys experience called mashal? Yeah, that is a parallel to this truth, which you guys have no clue about, for this idea that in elikus, the lower something is, the higher it's from, the higher the source. So when Chassidus or a teacher relays a concept in a mashal, it demonstrates the depth of which the teacher, the Rebbe in this case, understands the concept to the point that he can even use an absolutely foreign notion to relay an idea. So now, when it comes to Binyan HaMalchus, when it comes to eliciting from Hashem that he reinvest in creation, so we said earlier that there's two parts to this. There's the fact that Hashem reinvests in the divine system. And then there is the fact that the divine system thinks it's worth it to project outward into creation itself. So in the previous explanation, where we said that the reason why Binyan HaMalchus must reach the essence of Hashem is because Hashem is reevaluating the system itself, and if we have to go to the essence from which the system emerged, now we're saying the reverse. Because what we want to elicit from Hashem is not simply that he reinvest in a system, but we want him to reinvest in an other. We want him to reinvest in otherness, not just spiritual otherness, but physical otherness, and not just humans, not just animals, but even the inanimate, even mineral life. We say on Rosh HaShana, Kol Pol Kiyata Piyaltai, we want all the things you've done to know that you've done them, even the physical, tangible, immovable objects. And thus, if we want to elicit from Hashem that his investment be made even the lowest state of being, we must reach the highest state. So these are the two explanations for why Binyan HaMalchus must reach the highest state. Explanation number one is because everything reverts back to its source. Now, if everything goes back to its source, you must go to the original source, which is the essence of Hashem, touched by the Yid, who's connected to the essence of Hashem. That's explanation one. Explanation number two for why Binyan HaMalchus must touch the essence of Hashem is because what we want to elicit is Hashem's reinvestment even to the lowest state of being. And if it's going to come even to the lowest state of being, we must reach the highest state of being. And the highest state of being is Hashem himself. Now the Rebbe says a Gavaldik in. So this is all in some ways from Chassidus before. The Rebbe reframes it in this way, but it's often Chassidus before. But then the Rebbe adds an element which is Gavaldik. It says like this. If you're learning a Maamer Chassidus, and the Maamer Chassidus tells you that Binyan HaMalchus has to reach the essence of Hashem, must reach Atzmos Ered and Sof. And this Maamer you're learning tells you that the reason why you have to reach Atzmos Ered and Sof is because you're trying to draw down Hashem's energy into the lowest of places. And when you go to the lowest of places, you have to reach the highest of places. If that's the reason that this Maamer you're learning gives you, then you should know that Maamer is not talking about the real essence of Hashem. It's only talking about the loftiness of Hashem's essence. What does this mean? When we say that the lower something is, the higher it must be, what that means is that this high, lofty state is trying to prove a point. It's proving a point. It's proving its height by demonstrating to you how low it can go. But you're trying to prove a point. If you're trying to prove a point, it's not the essence of Hashem. The essence of Hashem doesn't have to prove anything. So what you're listening from Hashem at this level is Hashem's great loftiness. But loftiness itself is relative to something else that's not lofty. Even if the loftiness we talk about here is beyond. However many times you want to use the word beyond, you're still trying to demonstrate that we're proving a point. It's so lofty that it can even go so low. So it's a relative discussion. How lofty are you relative to how low this is? And why are you going from here to here? So if the explanation that the Maamer gives you, whatever Maamer you're learning, tells you that the reason why you must elicit from the essence of Hashem and Binyan HaMalchus is because you're trying to make the essence, the energy of Hashem go so low. Therefore, you must reach so high. You should know that you're talking about a level of elokos that has to prove a point about its loftiness. But if, as we are learning here, the reason why Binyan HaMalchus must reach the essence of Hashem is because everything reverts back to its original state. And if everything reverts back to its original state, all you're left with is the essence of Hashem from which everything emerged. And that's the reason why the Maamer tells you have to touch the essence of Hashem. Then you should know you're actually talking the essence. Because literally everything reverts back to its original state. Even the loftiest level, even the fact that Hashem has to prove a point, excuse me, by demonstrating that he's so lofty, he's going so low, even that reverts back to its original state. And if that's the reason that Binyan HaMalchus requires that we touch the essence of Hashem, then we're talking about the true essence of Hashem. And this is elicited by the Yid, which further sharpens for us the depth of which Hashem chooses the Yid, and the depth of which Hashem makes that choice in the Yid. The very essence of Hashem, it's even beyond Hashem being beyond, even beyond proving how lofty Hashem is. It's just the state of being, period. The Yid is connected to Hashem in a level where even after everything reverts back to its original source, the Yid is still there. And there becomes the question. This becomes what the Maamer really has to discuss here. Which is, if everything mamash reverts back to its original source, then why is the choice of the Yid not invested in that everything? Shouldn't the choice of the Yid or the Metzias, the existence of an Neshama, also be part of the everything that reverts back to its source? We're making this point that everything reverts back to its source, mamish everything, and if for Arthur you're left with is mamish etzem atzmas mohos, mamish the essence of Hashem. If everything reverts back to its source, and all you're left with is the actual essence of Hashem, then where's the Neshama here? The Neshama, the source of the Neshama also seemingly is part of the everything that reverts back to its source. So how is it shaykh the Neshama should do anything? Even to elicit this essence from Hashem. So explains the Rebbe like this. We have the Lashon in the Medrash that Yisrael olav machshav, that the Yid arises in God's thoughts. We also have this Lashon that b'min nimlach, whom did Hashem consult about the project called creation? In the souls of the righteous, the souls, the neshama of the Yid. So at what level does this consultation take place? And at what level do we say that the Yid is in Hashem's thoughts? So there are different kinds of thoughts. There's one kind of thought in which I'm thinking about something else. And that thought is somewhat detached from me. It's the kind of thoughts that I can choose to think about or not think about. Right now I'm thinking about the computer sitting in front of me. Okay, so I can close my eyes and decide to think about the cup in front of me instead. So even though the thought is happening inside my head, but it's really an external factor to me, I make a choice about what I'm thinking. And I turn off the thought or turn on the thought or switch the thought. It's one kind of thought. Then there are existential thoughts that I can't turn off. Let's say it's the awareness I have of myself. No matter what I choose to think about, in my thoughts, there exists the awareness that I'm here. It's not something I can choose to stop thinking about. The Rabbi doesn't say this in the Maamer, but it would seem to me that a way to demonstrate this point is the fact that a child who has no concept of self-awareness is in essence self-aware. And in no way am I more self-aware than the child is self-aware. It just so happens I have more language to explain my self-awareness, but I don't think I'm somehow more self-aware of my self-aware, not in the sense that like I'm aware of my surroundings and that kind of thing. Self-aware is in the sense that I know that I'm thinking. I'm aware of my own thoughts. I'm aware that I'm thinking. I'm aware that there's an I. I don't think that I have a better handle on that than the child, or somehow have a deeper understanding of that than the child. I have more words for it because I've lived longer, but it's such an existential state of myself that it just is. It's just a reality. If you're here and you're cognizant, you're aware of your cognizance, whether you have the words to describe it or not. It's an existential thought. Then there's another kind of existential thought. An existential thought, but you're thinking about something another. This is like a child. I think we're all parents here. At no point in time do we have are we not thinking about the fact that we have children? Even if we're thinking about something else completely entirely. The notion that we have children is a thought that exists in our brain always and forever. It's part of our existential self, but that's an other. And the same thing's true on the child's part. The child walks around, and the child is, in essence, the child of the son, of the father. Even though it's a complete other. And the same thing is true of the neshama. Hashem's thinking of the neshama. When we say that Hashem is that the Yid arose in Hashem's mashava, that the Yid arose in Hashem's thought, it's not as if it's a thought of an other. Even though in essence it's an other, because we're talking about a neshama. And which is why when the neshama comes here, lamata, it can live as a complete and total other, with complete independence, just like a child can live completely independent on the father. But in the truest sense, it's an existential attachment to an other. So if that's the case, then that the thought that Hashem has of the Yid is like the thought of a parent to a child, in which it's an existential thought, even though it's a thought of an other. Then when Hashem consults with the Yid, should we create? It's not just should we create as in we have a system. Now, is it worthwhile to invest in the system? Is it worthwhile for the system to project into the world outside? But the question then becomes, should there be a system? Similar to this idea of Rosh HaShana. When Hashem originally consulted with the Yid, it's the same thing as the Shofar. In the same way, the Shofar does two things. First of all, it brings Hashem's investment in creation because look, we're doing what you want. The project is working. But number two, and deeper still, the fact that there's a Yid here blowing the Shofar tells Hashem having a mission is worth it. Not just that the mission is being fulfilled, but having a mission b'chlal is worth it. Why? Because there's a Yid here. And this Yid is your existential self, even though it's an other. But be'etzem, it's your existential self. It's your child. Right. If you want, you could think of it in this kind of way. And this is a shtickle mashal. We'll have to stop over here. We went a little bit forward in the Maamer on Shabbos with the oil, but maybe we'll find some other occasion to finish it inside. But you can use a mashal like this. You know, this is also a way of thinking about teshuvah. Yeah. So if it's a mashal that I borrowed from Rabbi Steinsaltz. If you have a child and parent playing chess, and the father and son are playing chess. So, and the child messes up, does a wrong move. The child's going to lose. So one level is appeal to the game. See if you can convince your father to bend the rules that I can take back my move. Okay, either the father is going to be gracious or not gracious, depending on the rules of the game and the dynamics of the relationship and the age of the child. Maybe the father will say, okay, we're going to take back that move, try a different move. Maybe. So in that case, The child is appealing to the system of the game. Can we manipulate the system to make it work? But then there's a whole other way of doing teshuvah. The father turns to the child and says, look, why are we playing chess? Because the game matters. We're playing chess because you want to spend time with me. You want to spend time with me? Good. Because I'm your son? Fine. Let's start the game over. Now I'm not appealing to the system and asking my father to manipulate the system on my behalf. I'm appealing to the parent who's invested in the system and saying, look, why are you in this whole system? Why are you in this whole game? Because you want to spend time with your child. Good. I'm your child. I'm yours. Let's restart. That's the other element of the shofar. It's not a question of the shofar per se, but it's a question of who's blowing the shofar. It's your child blowing the shofar. And because it's your child blowing the shofar, the whole system is worth it. Not just that the system is working and therefore you should project in the system, but the system is worth it because there's a yid here. Because this yid is your existential thought, even as I am an other. Like a child who is existentially attached to the parent, even as he remains an other. The Maamer gets even more nuanced, if you can believe it. And we'll have to find some occasion, God willing, to finish the Maamer. We're in Ois Ches, if you want to know where we are exactly in the Maamer. We got through to Ois Ches, and there is Ches Tes Yud Aleph. So it's not so much more to the Maamer, and perhaps another occasion. A wonderful day, Yidin.